I don't want to hold up the program too much longer, but Dr. Short is one of these very first people we met in Adelphi. He's been a very close friend. He's been an advisor of Chabad. He will represent himself so much better than I will. So without further ado, Dr. Stephen Short.
All right, it's a pleasure to meet you all. Can everybody hear me? All right, good. And if we have someone who can pass this out. Yeah, do I have a volunteer? Volunteers. All right. All right, so as the handout is being passed out, it's such a pleasure and such an honor to see so many people gathered here today, especially during these challenging times. And we have to support ourselves. And I can see that. And I also want to mention Father Prasanna Costa over here, who is here supporting us. And instead of focusing on differences and fighting with other religions, let's be friends. Let's work together under one Hashem. So what we're going to do is you're going to experience a little bit of what it's like to be autistic. And I bring this to you based on personal experience. And it starts way back at 18 months. Until 18 months, I developed typically like any other child. And then at that time, like what happens to about 30% of us autistic people, I was struck with the regressive autism moment, where I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and am bereaved. I became a very autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism in those days. So little known that it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, the doctor said they'd never seen such a sick child. And the doctors recommended institutionalization. Well, fortunately, my parents, like we see ever increasing numbers of parents around the world, Baruch Hashem, they advocated on my behalf and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that my parents implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this was a program that emphasized music, movement, sensory integration, narration, imitation. And that's all terminology that we use today. Because in those days, the concept of early intervention didn't even exist. It was so little known at that time. So with the work that my parents did, speech, which had been lost at 18 months, starts to come back at age 4. What did my parents do? Well, first, they desperately tried to get me to imitate them. So how many of you have used imitation as a teaching strategy, even if you're not a teacher? Everybody's hand should be up. Everybody has shown somebody else how to do something, whether it's the Aleph base, whether it's something else. This is how it sounds. Now you say it. You do it. But perhaps due to a difference in mirror neurons, as it is for autistic people, it didn't work. So then my parents, Baruch Hashem, they flipped it around and they imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And that is what got me to a point where I could speak, beginning at age 4. That's when speech started to return. And I believe the important implication is that before doing any meaningful work with an autistic person, you have to meet them where they are. Then you build a trusting relationship. Then you can move on. And I think that works for everybody else as well, autistic or otherwise. So then I went to that school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered a psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to a neurotic. Things are moving up in the world. We often hear about interests that autistic people have, because one characteristic of autism is a widely varying skill set, which translates to the things we're good at, we can be really good at. The things we're not so good at, well, yeah, we're gonna need a good amount of support. And for me, I was found by my parents taking apart a watch just like this with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, I'd remove the motor, extract some of the gears, spin them around, and then put it all back together again. And the watch still worked. And there weren't any pieces left over. So what we have here is incredible fine motor control to take apart a watch. Fine motor control that you use to button your shirt, tie your shoes, right, eat. Make sure the fork ends up in your mouth and not in your ear. That's fine motor control. Gross motor control is big body movements. That's sitting down in a chair, carrying heavy objects, for example. So how could it be that I had the fine motor control to take apart a watch, not even using the right tool? Then where did it go when it came to penmanship in school? That was a total penmanship disaster area, like so many of us autistic people are. There's been a lot of research done on this. We don't exactly know the answer, and I would turn you over to your favorite occupational therapist for some neurological explanations. However, what this is also an example of is the sharp lines of demarcation that Hashem gives to autistic people, the incredible skills on one side, and often the big challenges on the other side. And often not that much in the middle either. And that's another characteristic of autism that is not often mentioned in diagnostic criteria. And it can be very confusing. How can this person be so good at this, but have such challenges in that over there? So anyways, moving along, on to elementary school. That was a social and academic catastrophe. You know what happens to people who are different in grade school? Fortunately, school systems have begun to realize that bullying is not a developmental phase that people need to go through, and we need to do something about it. Academically, I was about a grade behind in most of my subjects. In fact, I'd spend most of my time in elementary school going to the library, getting books on my favorite subjects, which might have been music, space exploration, aviation, various sciences, other such things, reading them, taking notes, copying diagrams, and then putting them all away and getting books on something else. And I remember in third grade, I had a stack of astronomy books on my desk. And a teacher told me that I never learned how to do math. But somehow I figured out just enough math to teach statistics at the university level. These days, more educators would notice a highly focused interest and then find a way to teach the autistic person using that interest. Moving on to middle and high school. You don't need to be autistic to have difficulties in middle and high school. How many of you found middle and high school challenging? Yeah, a lot. I think even most people. For me, it was actually easier. And the reason why is that I was able to engage in my focused interest of music. I joined the band. Now I had a structured activity to mediate my interactions with others. I was able to geek out on music. That's what we had in common. But of course, being autistic and taking things to the nth degree, I got it into my autistic head. I needed to learn how to play all the instruments. So there I was, hours in the instrument closet, taking instruments apart, sometimes assembling 2 or 3 instruments into some contraptions that never should have seen the light of day. And while I didn't learn them all, I did get it up to about 15. And this is also about the time we start thinking about getting a bar mitzvah. Reading Hebrew was impossible for me. So my parents, using a strength-based approach, instead of forcing something that didn't work, they looked for something that did work. How did they figure that out? Hashem must have guided them. And so the cantor of our synagogue, of our shul, he recorded all of the prayers that you would say. And the first 3 days of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim, et Hashemayim, that's where it started. And it was one big echolalia session, all the way through. I mean, I knew what I was saying, I knew what the translation was, and it got me through, and it was an amazing experience. So then, on to college. College was a utopia. I had more friends. The bullies were gone. If I wanted to ride my bicycle at midnight, I could find someone just as strange to also ride at midnight. And studying music was just the best thing one could ever do. And that's what I did. I took it all the way to the end of my doctoral studies, doctoral coursework. And then I started getting interested in this thing called autism and special education. So I defected to the School of Special Education and got my doctorate in special education. It was about that time that I started writing about autism, giving presentations on autism. And as we fast forward to today, I now spend my time either teaching or researching about issues related to autism, primarily involving autistic people in research. And I don't mean studying autistic people, but involving autistic people in all aspects of designing the research, implementing it, analyzing the results, and so on. Because if we're going to study a community, it only makes sense to involve that community. And when I'm not here, I'm traveling. I travel to a different country about once a month, including 3 times to Israel. I've been to 58 different countries so far talking about autism. So what do I do when I get an invitation to speak at a conference? Well, the first thing I do is I go to Chabad.org. All right, where's the closest Chabad? And if I'm not in Calcutta, India, then at least it'll be closer than 500 miles away. But there are enough Chabad houses in the world, of 5,000 or more, whatever it is, that I can usually find one pretty close by. And sometimes it's even next door. And I go. And as I travel around the world, I also make sure to go to Chabad on Friday night, and Saturday. And it's very meaningful to me. It's meaningful to me. And I'm at Shabbat somewhere, just about every Friday of the year. Chabad does amazing work in providing a Jewish home for autistic students and everybody else, by the way. So whenever I travel, I feel like I'm at home. So for example, in Shanghai, China, going to the Chabad there, outside the door, you're in China, you step over the threshold, and you might as well be in Rabbi Lipsker's home. And everything is as I expect. And Chabad is so welcoming, which is why I feel it's important to contribute to Chabad every month. Because of the amazing work and the amazing support that I see Rabbi Lipsker and Mushki giving to our students. And it really is a home away from home. So for now, what's it like to be autistic? Well, let's find out. We're gonna find out with this activity. Then after the activity, maybe we'll answer a few questions, but we're gonna have most of our questions after we do the kiddush, after we have the dinner, and during dessert. So everybody has received this nice colorful handout here. And what you're gonna do is you're going to get in groups of 5. You'll get into groups of 5. And one person is going to play the role of the autistic person. The next person's gonna stand behind person number 1, and it's going to be the neck scratcher. So you'll take your ID and you'll scratch it up and down, back of person number 1's head. Number 3, you'll take any sort of reading material and you'll lean too close to the person, kind of like this, too close, and read really loudly into his ear. Then number 4, you're the pat person, and you're gonna pat person number 1 right on the yarmulke if he's a guy, on the head and the shoulder at the same time. Number 5, you're going to take a different set of text. Maybe it's from here, maybe it's somewhere else, maybe it's from your cell phone, whatever it is. And you're gonna read it to the person at a normal distance in a normal voice. And then you only need to do it for about 30 seconds. Then you're going to ask person number 1 some questions about what you read. And then you're gonna shift it so that more people can get a chance at experiencing person number 1. It looks like the easiest way to do this might be by tables. And many of the tables have more than 5 people, so there's gonna be some people left over. So either you could join another group, or you could be an observer. You'll be an observer, and you're gonna watch. All right, so let's get ready. 1, 2, 3, go. I did.
Yeah, you're doing a great job.
Okay, I'm gonna really loudly in your ear, okay?
Summer home in Rhode Island. So we're looking for Murray Thursday or Murray. Thank you, Cal.
Rabbi, how are you? Rabbi, we laid filling before Shabbat. Yes? What time is Shabbat?
That's 7. Louis.
Yeah, send Shmuley over.
Hello? Can I make an announcement?
You want me person number one? Want me person number one? No. Why? Oh. I hand up.
All right.
So you're already autistic? This thing actually fun, right?
Yeah, what?
Chabad, and all my friends.
So who wants to
Kosher bagel.
what you experienced?
Eric here last.
Ready,
Eric, you're first. Who wants to play fill first?
So basically,
Eric, you're first.
what it was like to be number one was very annoying to say the least. because, I, basically had, people patting me on the back and like rubbing a card up against my neck. And like, it was extremely like, what is going on, like, what the heck is going on? And also I had a person saying like, what the sigma, and also like weird stuff in my face, and it was like so much to process, and it was like so weird.
It is so weird, and it's so much to process. Who else wants to talk about their experience being number one? Have another volunteer. Over here.
Hi, so, I also felt it mostly in my body. I was so focused on whatever was going on with my neck. It's happening that I could not really figure out what else was going on. That was really, and then I was like, oh, it took me a few seconds to realize actually a second person was also reading to me.
All right, so it sounds like you're getting a lot of sensory input and noticing it on the back of the neck. And some people find that very irritating and distracting. Whereas others find it kind of soothing, comforting. So it really depends on the individual. Who else wants to talk about being number one? I have another number one. Over here.
I was trying to listen to the paragraph that was being read next to me, but it was hard to focus, so I was getting distracted by the other person who was reading, and also by the the touching as well.
All right, so distraction. Oh, we've got another one.
I was reading to him. I was reading to him.
Right.
But what I was reading, only God knows. It made absolutely no sense.
It was from my son's favorite book, the Pokemon handbook.
It made absolutely no sense to me. I've been jumping around trying to find it.
So just too much input. And so let's think about it. We got one more. We got one more taker. All right. Yeah, that's all right. All right, so some of you experienced what it was like to be on this side of the issue. And it can be very distracting.
Smile.
Now, there's some differences between what you experienced and what the autistic person experienced.
Few photos here.
Well, specifically, the
Everybody
autistic
smiles,
person
everybody.
who has sensory issues.
Thank you.
But also there may be people who have sensory challenges and aren't necessarily autistic either. Some of the differences are, some of the big differences are, one, it was time limited.
Video.
So even if you thought it was unbearable, you knew it was only gonna last about a minute. And you could get through it. But for the autistic person, like that all day and all night, just never been. What else? Every now and then, when I try to do this, when I do this activity, somebody just gets overwhelmed. And they stand up, usually they flop like this, and they'll say, stop. Now, if you're number one in your group told you to stop, would you stop or would you keep going? Yeah, you probably stop for them. How many times has the autistic child in class, student, with all of this going on around them, ask for a break, tell the teacher to stop. So otherwise communicates it. But the teacher says, just keep going, we have to finish, But they really need a break. And then finally, there's one more. That is the expectation. What was the expectation for person number one to get the answers right? Well, this was an activity, so you knew that the expectations were between 0 and 9.
Yeah.
For the autistic person in school, at work, at home, in the community, in schools, we're expected to get it right all the time. They get that additional pressure. So that is, so you've got a little bit of an idea of what it's like to be autistic. Often people ask me, they told us what it was like to be autistic as a child. What's it like to be autistic as an adult? Are you still autistic? Yeah, I'm still autistic. That person is autistic their entire life. So how does it affect them? Well, for one, many of you may think that this has a fashion statement. And in many ways it is. It's always good to support the university and do that wherever I go, wherever I am around the world. But in reality, it's an accommodation. Because for me, being under recessed lighting fixtures like those is probably like looking into a spotlight for the rest of you. So that's one area autism affects you. How else does it affect me? Maybe you notice my clothes are a little bit baggy. Barely. Because I can't tolerate tight clothing. It's just too much sensory input. So as long as I don't have to look like a banker or a lawyer or an accountant, that's gonna be okay. I know other autistic people who wear very tight wristbands and clothing, incredibly tight. I don't know how we can stand that. But he tells it, he says he needs this tight clothing because it helps him feel where his body is in the environment. And that's another aspect of autism. Body to environmental differentiation. Where does your body end? The environment begin. Let's all try something. Everybody touch the back of your chair. All right, looks like you all got it. You can let go now. How many of you had to turn around to visually locate the back of the chair so you could touch it? Or did you just sort of know it's back there and I can touch it? That's body to environmental differentiation. For autistic individuals, we may not have that good of body to environmental relations. And if you don't know where your body is in the environment, you're going to have a hard time doing anything else. Another thing, another area autism affects me. Many autistic people have difficulty with facial recognition. Remembering faces. I think I've seen these people before. Where have I seen them? These are my colleagues. I've known them for a long time, over a decade, so I recognize. But as a professor, it makes it hard for me to recognize my students in class. Now I see faces and I perceive them just as well as anybody here. But every time I meet someone, or I see someone's face, it's like seeing the face for the first time. Because for autistic people, the way the brain is wired, facial recognition or information about faces goes to the object recognition center of the brain. And the object recognition center of the brain is really good at recognizing to fill in, recognizing computers, recognizing other objects. But it's really bad at remembering faces. So that's a little bit about what it's like for me being autistic here at Adelphi University and Reverend South.
Literally just moving around.
So I think we have a few moments for questions. Yes, we do. Who's got a question? You've got one right now.
Interesting observation. I actually have come across is that there are people who sometimes are thought to have more severe autism than they really do. Or like sometimes, they'll be moved from a more restrictive environment to a less restrictive environment. Or vice versa.
Have a funny face.
So like, is there like research being done on how to like prevent those stuff?
All right, so is there research being done to determine what the capacity is of an autistic person? Because often an autistic person will be misplaced in terms of educational placement and curriculum that's provided. And the truth is, we're pretty bad at that. Because often when we look at autistic people, for example, if an autistic person doesn't speak, they're non-speaking. Often we consider that person as being more severely autistic, more severely, significantly affected. Sometimes the term low functioning is used, but we're getting away from the terms high and low functioning. However, I know many autistic people who don't speak and look pretty significantly affected in the way they move. However, if you get them in front of a keyboard, like over there, that computer, they'll start typing. It might be a bit slow because they might have a hard time controlling their muscles. But you'll find that they have the same range of intelligence as the rest of us. They just are not neurologically set up to speak. And that's an example of someone who is miscategorized as someone who's too severe, too something to bother with. But actually, they've got the same intelligence we do. And many non-speaking autistics who are getting degrees, just like all of you students, all the way through doctoral degrees. They're doing research. And now I'll get to in a moment. Then we can flip it the other way around. I have an autistic friend who has a measured IQ of over 200. Well, if you're familiar with IQ tests, you know they don't go that high, so it's just a guess. She has amazing skills in speaking, gymnastics, other things. But at the same time, she has such severe sensory challenges and such significant challenges in social interaction that she's never going to find employment the way we think about finding and keeping a job. So is she high functioning? Does that describe her well? Is she low functioning? Or is using high and low functioning a low functioning way of talking about autism? And you had a question.
So what does the data tell us about the incidence of autism? Because you hear stories from certain presidential candidates. What is Robert Kennedy, the vaccine, which seems to be erroneous, but is there a higher measure, more incidence of it today, or 20 years, 40 or 60 years ago? And if so, is that better measurement or is there something changing?
All right, so incidence of autism. So very brief history lesson. Unfortunately, autism has been around for maybe only around 80 years, so it goes by really fast. So in 1912, Eugene Bleuler first used the word autism when he was writing about some of his patients, but nobody paid much attention. That was over in Switzerland. Then in 1943, Leo Kanner wrote a paper about disturbances of affective content in 11 of his patients. That popularized the term autism. Not at that time that autism was caused by poor parenting, poor mothering to be specific. And then Bruno Bettelheim came around in the 1960s and promoted this refrigerator mother concept, where he believed that at a key point in development, the child's mother ignored that child, maybe didn't understand what the child wanted, and everybody here who is a parent, mother or father, can probably point to a time, gee, I wish I could have figured out what my child wanted a little faster than I really figured it out. So then he'd pounce on that and he'd say, oh, you ignored your child. Now your child feels like they're in a Nazi internment camp. And that's the term that he used. He actually believed that. He came and he was in Germany during time of the concentration camps. I don't remember if he was actually in one. But he said that's what the child feels like because the mother ignored him. Well, mothers got blamed for over a generation. Fortunately, later on, Dr. Bernard Grimland realized that his wife was a good mother to their autistic child and said, no, it's not from the mother, unless you want to count perhaps passing on as genetic material, but it must be something else. And that's when we started seeing an explosion of research into biomedical causes, including vaccines. Now, if we think about vaccines, vaccines are given, many vaccines are given between the 18 to 24 month period when the regressive autism volume explodes. So there's a lot of good correlation between when a vaccine is given and when autistic characteristics get recognized. But as we know, correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. And now we realize, I'll get to it in a moment, now we realize that there are many clues as to the causes of autism. But we don't know, we don't have a good grasp on what it is. Best minds in research believe that it starts out with a genetic predisposition. So that makes sense because it's the autistic characteristics in family. And then something in the environment triggers it. We don't know quite what it is. So why is it that we've gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 36, or almost 3%? And I think a couple of reasons. One is we've gotten much better at recognizing autism when we see it. So we see it, we recognize it, we no longer call the autistic students dumb, stupid, mentally retarded, or whatever it might be, but now we know what it is. Now that we know what it is, we can conduct more research into interventions and teaching and support strategies, help autistic individuals. We've also broadened this. Because I remember when I was trying to get accommodations during my doctoral program. At that time, people believed, well, if you're autistic, you're banging your head and you're not speaking and you're having meltdowns and you can't make sense of anything. That's what people thought autism was. Now we know autism is a lot more. And with this better understanding of autism, we're seeing increasing numbers of autistic students, just like at the Bridges program. So there are better supports in education, and we know how to support autistic individuals. And yes. Yeah, we can. All right, we'll take this one and then I'll take.
I want to ask you a question about the amount of autistic people there are in the world. What's the number of autistic people, like what percentage of people in the world are autistic?
All right, so what percentage of people are autistic? It depends who you ask. If you ask the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, then it's 1 out of 36, almost 3%. So then take the world's population, multiply it by 3%. If you go to other countries, they consider numbers of about 1% or 2%. So take an average and say it's 2% at this point.
Yeah.
Multiply that by the 8 billion or so people we have, and you've got your number, whether it's recognized or not. Okay. So anyways, I know there's many more questions. It's time to get ready for Shabbat. We've got the candles over here, and the fun will continue afterwards. Also, before we start, don't get to your question, or you think of one later. Got my contact information is here. And there's also there's an article and a video interview on Chabad.org, if you want to find out more about me. Well, find on the bottom. So let's get ready for Shabbat.